ABC Wednesday.
Y'all complain all day. We want books. We want paper towels in the classroom. Bet you want raises too.
I'm still waiting on the paper towels.
Abbott Elementary returns with the new season.
We asked the district for more after-school programs. They gave us $50 for class pets instead.
Critics cheer. Abbott Elementary continues to be one of the funniest and most beloved shows on TV.
What y'all doing out there?
Taking bribes.
Proud of y'all.
Abbott Elementary. Season premiere Wednesday, 9:30, 8:30 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu.
My name is Lorne Michaels. I'm the producer of Saturday Night.
The whole night?
Yeah, the whole night.
Based on the insane true story of the first time Saturday Night went live.
You ordered a llama?
Yeah, we all decided it was much funnier than a donkey.
Saturday Night, rated R, now playing exclusively in theaters.
Hello, and welcome back to 3D Printing Basics. This is episode number 32, and in this episode, we are going to be discussing PLA filament, and more specifically, does PLA filament, quote-unquote, expire? Before we get into it, I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for supporting this podcast. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me. All the emails and the messages and the good reviews that I get, it makes me really happy to know that I'm doing something that is really affecting the 3D printing community in a positive way. And it's just exactly what I wanted to do. It's exactly the reason I started this podcast and what I hope to achieve with it. So it makes me feel really good to know that I'm achieving the goal that I set out for myself. And that's thanks to you guys. So thank you to everybody who's listening to this podcast. And again, if you have any questions or if you have any emails that you wanted to send me, my email is down in the show notes, so please feel free to reach out to me. I will try to respond to every single one. I may not get to all of them, but I will definitely try to respond to every single email that I get. And with that being said, let's get right into the episode. So this episode idea actually came from an email. I got an email from Donald, and the question that he had was he had filaments that had been stored for about 4 to 5 years. And he wanted to know if they were still usable or not. And I asked him how he stored them, and he said that they were bagged up with desiccant and completely vacuum sealed. And my response to that was, oh, it should be totally fine. But then that got me thinking, is it fine? Because he had opened them up and then resealed them. And that just kind of led me down the rabbit hole of exploring specifically PLA filament and the different conditions that it's stored in and whether or not it can really expire. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, and so that's what we're going to get into. So to start, I just did some basic looking around, and what I found was that pretty much everybody has a different answer to the question of does PLA filament expire? I've seen in the research that I've been doing, I've seen anywhere from it lasting 6 months in perfect conditions to literally, I have an article saying that it can last 12 to 18 years if stored correctly. So I'm just going to give the facts of these articles in my research as I found them, and the rest of it I'll leave up to you. So here in this first article that I was reading, this person basically had a question. They said that they haven't been 3D printing for a long time and they wanted to get back into it, which I'm sure is definitely something that has happened to some of us. I know it's happened to me before. Life catches up with us and we don't have so much time to dedicate to our hobbies. But once we get back into it, especially with something like 3D printing where constant maintenance is almost a requirement to ensure that you get good print quality, I'm sure that many people have had this question of the stuff, if you leave things for a few years, your printers, your filaments, is it still okay to use? And the answer to this, in at least this article, is yes, with conditions. If you keep your PLA filament sealed or just tightly in a contained space, and most importantly, out of the sunlight, then your PLA filament can last for years before it quote-unquote expires. And I think the biggest factor with PLA filament is to keep it out of the sunlight, because PLA is not UV resistant at all. Like I've said before in my episode that was all about PLA filament, it cannot be outside. It does not last out in the sun. If you leave it outside for any length of time, it's going to start to degrade. It's going to start to melt and deform. It's not UV resistant. So if you have PLA filament and you planned on putting it outside, don't do that. You got to print with something else, or just keep it inside. And even if you keep it inside, if you keep prints, say, in the windowsill, and it's getting sunlight every single day, that will start to affect the PLA too. Most specifically, it's going to affect the coloring of it. PLA fades really, really quick when it's exposed to direct sunlight all day, every day. And the same goes for when it's on the roll as when it's 3D printed. So if you have a roll of if you have a roll of PLA filament, be sure to keep it out of the sunlight at all costs. If you leave it in the sunlight, that is going to make it degrade super, super quick. And from what I've seen on these articles, that can make your PLA go from lasting years to lasting just a matter of weeks. And what PLA will do when it expires is it will become super, super brittle. And if there's something that you wanted to do to find out if your PLA is expired or not, you can do what's called the snap test. And it's really, really simple. You just take the roll that you want to test and you bend the filament at a 180-degree angle. If it snaps off, keep doing that a few more times, go on down the roll. And if it keeps snapping, then you have a problem. That PLA is not good. If it's super brittle, then you might want to try drying it out, but that filament is not good to print with. If it just bends and doesn't snap off, doesn't break off, then that roll of filament is good to go. You can do whatever you want with it. All right, now I want to get into this other article that specifically says that if you store your filament right, it can last up to 15 years. Okay? So this was very, very interesting to me because this is kind of the only article that I could find that suggests this. Most of the stuff that I did find in my research was saying that it can last 1 year, maybe 5 years, but somewhere in the 1 to 5 year range if you keep track of it. And then this article is coming out and saying it can last approximately more than 15 years. So I was interested. I kept reading it. And of course, it has in very, very specific conditions. The line right after it specifically says, quote, "This is if it's kept at its recommended storage temperature of 10 to 40 degrees Celsius and away from direct sunlight." And me knowing my audience and knowing myself, we're not going to be able to keep those specific conditions, much less for 15 years. So, hey, if you have the ability to keep things in 30% or less humidity, 10 to 40 degrees Celsius, and out of the sunlight, then hey, you can keep PLA for as long as you want. But I know that's not realistic for most of us. So that was just something that I found interesting. And then it says right below it, funny enough, it says PLA that's not sealed and exposed to direct sunlight may only survive 1 year. PLA exposed to direct sunlight and ambient temperature can survive for 1 week. And PLA filaments exposed to more than 60% humidity can be usable for less than a month, but still can produce bad prints. So that's kind of the conclusion that I've come with when it comes to can PLA filament expire? It's yes, under certain conditions. If you keep conditions correct, then you should be able to keep PLA filament for a long time. The thing that I believe is most important when it comes to storing PLA filament is keeping it out of direct sunlight. I know sunlight is going to be the biggest harming factor for PLA because of its lack of UV resistance. PLA hates the sun, it hates the sunlight, it hates anything that's even really hot. And trust me, I know, living in Southern California, I know PLA really doesn't like being in the sunlight or anywhere close to any kind of heat. So sunlight is definitely the biggest thing. If you can keep these things vacuum sealed in bags and in boxes, that's only going to prolong the lifespan. If you keep it sealed, that's going to be super, super ideal for the PLA filament because then you're controlling humidity. Because like I said, if you expose filaments to more than 60% humidity, which I feel like is maybe average. I don't have the stats, but maybe it's average. It seems pretty average for, especially in the United States, the 60% humidity doesn't seem like it's all that uncommon in the States. That's going to really tank your PLA quality super, super fast. So make sure you keep things at a low humidity And you can do that by just keeping it sealed with desiccant inside and keep it out of direct sunlight. What I used to do before I moved into my office and I was just printing out of my house is I kept all of my filament, especially my PLA filament, in the closet. And this was a super good solution because the closet was a smaller space. It was easier to keep things humidity controlled in the closet. For example, I just used a dehumidifier that you could find online that was for a bathroom, and I just stuck it in the closet, and it did a really good job because the closet was a really small space. So it was easy enough to control that humidity. And also, I put tons of desiccant in there to help with it, and it was out of direct sunlight. It was closed 99% of the time. The closet door was closed, so there was no sunlight getting in. And I believe that this played a huge role in my PLA filament lasting for as long as it did. I had rolls in there that I hadn't used for 3 years, and then I was able to pull them out when I needed them, and they worked just brand new. And sometimes, honestly, sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes I would pull out PLA filament that, was not used that long. I remember one specific instance. I got a roll that had been delivered in the rain, and I unboxed it, and immediately it was not usable. It printed terrible quality. I could just tell the rain on the box had gotten into the filament, and it was just not good. But thankfully for PLA, it's really easy to dry out. And if your filament is not printing good, and if it's failing the snap test, if it's snapping off, and if it just doesn't look like it's printing very good quality, try drying the filament, because that fixes a ton of problems that especially PLA filaments can have, because PLA filament is easy to dry. You can stick it in the oven. The Bamboo Lab printing line, I don't know if anybody else has this, but the Bamboo Lab printing line has a setting specifically for filament drying. You can set the roll on the bed, and if you cover it with a box, it will dry the filament for you. And there are tons of other ways. There are filament dryers you can buy online. You can make your own with a food dehydrator like I did. There's tons of different ways to dry your filament, and that will essentially give you a brand new roll in a few hours. So please, if you have a bad roll of filament, don't just throw it away and get a new one. Try fixing it first, because they're really easy to fix, and then you can print with it like it's just brand new. All right. I believe that's everything I have to say about PLA. I hope that answers the question of does it expire or not. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I'll talk to you next time.